For the last 8 months, I told myself I was being reasonable, that I was being the bigger person. That's what you do when you're 64 years old and you've already buried your wife and you don't want to lose your son too. You tell yourself you're being reasonable and you keep your mouth shut and you move your things into the basement. What I didn't tell anyone, not my son, not his wife, not even my brother, was that I had already spoken to my lawyer in November, 3 months before any of this came to a head. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I built a house at 14 Sycamore Ridge Drive in Barrie, Ontario with my own hands. Not literally. I'm a retired civil engineer, not a carpenter. But I designed it, I financed it, I chose every fixture and every beam. My wife and I moved in when our son was 7 years old. She passed away from ovarian cancer 11 years ago, and since then it had just been me rattling around in that 4-bedroom house on the edge of the Greenbelt, with her garden still in the backyard and her handwriting still on the recipe cards in the kitchen drawer. My son is 31. He works in logistics for a freight company out of Mississauga. He's a good man, mostly. At least he used to be. He met his wife at a work conference in Calgary about 3 years ago. She moved to Ontario to be with him, and for the first year or so, things were fine. She was polite enough. She laughed at my jokes. She ate whatever I cooked on Sunday evenings without complaint. I thought we were getting along. Then they got married, and something shifted. I couldn't tell you the exact moment. It was gradual, the way these things always are. A comment here, a look there. She started referring to the house as our place in conversation. Not my place, not your dad's place, but our place, and my son never corrected her. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I thought, she's young, she's just getting comfortable, this is normal. What wasn't normal was what happened the following March. My son called me into the living room one evening after dinner. His wife was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, and he was standing by the fireplace with that particular look on his face, the one he gets when he's delivering bad news he wishes he didn't have to deliver. I recognized it. He had that same look when he told me he wasn't going to university, that he was going straight into the workforce. That look. He said they had been talking, and they felt the house needed to be reorganized. His wife was pregnant, only 8 weeks, he was quick to add. Nothing confirmed yet, and they wanted to start thinking ahead. They needed more space. They needed the master bedroom on the main floor. I waited. He said they thought it would make more sense. More sense, that was the phrase he used. If I moved my things to the basement suite. Now, I want to be clear about something. The basement of that house is not a dungeon. It has a finished reek room, a 3-piece bathroom, a utility sink, and a small bedroom I had originally built as a guest room for when my brother visited from Winnipeg. It was livable, but it was also where I stored my late wife's boxes, her winter coats, the photo albums from our first years together. The basement smelled like cedar and old carpet, and the particular kind of quiet that accumulates in spaces where no one lives. I asked him, calmly, I want you to know I was calm. I asked him why they didn't take one of the 3 other bedrooms upstairs. There were 4 bedrooms on the upper floor. 2 of them were completely empty. I had a guest room and a study. Neither one was being used. His wife answered before he could. She said the nursery needed to be close to their bedroom. She said going up and down stairs at night with a newborn wasn't practical. She said it with the casual authority of someone who has already decided the conversation is over. I looked at my son. He looked at the carpet. I said I would think about it. That night I sat in my study, The one with the window that looks out over the greenbelt, the one where I used to sit with my wife on Saturday mornings and drink coffee and read the paper, and I did the arithmetic on my life. I was 63 years old. I had worked for 38 years. I had paid off that mortgage in full by the time I was 57. The house was mine, free and clear, registered solely in my name at the land registry office. I had no legal obligation to rearrange my life around anyone's preferences. But I also had a son I loved, and I didn't want to be the father who made everything about property rights. So I told myself I'd try it for a few months. I'd move to the basement, let them have the main floor, and we'd see how things went. That was my first mistake, not moving to the basement. That part I could have recovered from. My mistake was not saying clearly and out loud that this was temporary and conditional. I left the terms undefined, and she took that silence and built a permanent structure on top of it. Within 6 weeks, she had repainted the master bedroom. I came upstairs to get something from the hall closet, and I could smell the paint before I even reached the landing. She had chosen a color called pale willow. I know because the sample card was still on the kitchen counter. My wife and I had painted that room together in 2003, antique white. I had spent a Saturday on a ladder doing the trim because my wife had a bad shoulder. I remembered the whole day. She had brought me coffee and made fun of my painting technique, and we had laughed until the walls were done. I stood in the hallway and I breathed through it. I went back downstairs. I called my lawyer the following morning. Her name is not important either, but she had handled my wife's estate and she knew my situation well. I told her I wanted to understand my options. We had a long conversation. She asked me several questions I wasn't expecting. She asked whether I had ever transferred any ownership interest in the property, whether my son's name appeared anywhere on the title, whether I had made any written or verbal promises about inheritance. I told her no to all of it. She said I was in a strong position. She told me to document everything, dates, conversations, changes to the property, and not to confront anyone yet. She said to let things develop and to stay calm. I was already staying calm. I had been staying calm for months. What I was also doing without announcing it was paying attention. I started keeping a notebook, nothing dramatic, just dates and brief descriptions. March 14, asked to move to basement. April 3, master bedroom repainted without discussion. April 19, my wife's gardening tools moved from the back shed to the curb for garbage pickup. I hadn't been consulted. I found out when I was taking my walk and saw them sitting there in a box marked free. I brought them back inside without saying a word. My son was at work when that happened. I think if he had known, he might have said something. I tell myself that at least. The pregnancy was confirmed in May. My son called me upstairs to tell me, and he was genuinely happy, the real kind of happy, not performed, and I hugged him and told him I was glad. I was glad. Whatever was happening with the living arrangements, the idea of a grandchild was not something I could be angry about. His wife smiled at me over his shoulder. It was not a warm smile. That summer was the hardest part, not because anything dramatic happened, but because of the accumulation of small things. My name being left off the grocery list she kept on the refrigerator, my mail being moved from the front hall table to a basket in the basement laundry room, which I only discovered when I went looking for a utility bill. My parking spot in the driveway being quietly taken over by her second car, a Mazda she had bought in June, while my truck was left on the street. In Barrie in January, parking on the street means scraping frost off your windshield at 6:30 in the morning. I am 64 years old with a hip that disagrees with January. I kept writing in my notebook. There was an evening in August when the three of us were eating dinner. I had made chicken with roasted vegetables because Sundays had always been my cooking night and I had not conceded that yet. And she made a comment about the house feeling small. She said it in that considering tone, as if she were thinking out loud, and she said maybe when the baby came they would need to think about the long-term plan for the property. My son said nothing. I asked her what she meant by long-term plan. She smiled and said she just meant it was a big decision and they wanted to make sure everyone was comfortable. I said I was comfortable. She said she was glad to hear that. After dinner, I went downstairs and I called my brother in Winnipeg. He's a retired RCMP officer, so he's fairly hard to rattle. I told him what was happening. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "You know what you need to do." I told him I was already doing it. He said, "Good." Then he told me to call him if I needed someone to drive down. In September, I took a week off and drove to Toronto to meet with my lawyer in person. We went through everything I had documented. She prepared a comprehensive file. She also explained something to me that I hadn't fully understood before, that in Ontario, a registered property owner in occupation of their own home has significant legal standing, and that any attempt to force me out could expose the other parties to serious liability. She used phrases I wrote down and looked up later. She was very thorough. I left her office feeling, for the first time in months, like I had solid ground under my feet. I didn't tell my son any of this. October was when things came apart. My son came downstairs on a Saturday morning with that look on his face again. His wife was upstairs. I could hear her moving around the kitchen. He sat down across from me in the basement rec room. In my own house. My son came down to visit me in the basement of my own house, and he told me that they had been talking, and they felt it was time to make some decisions. I asked him what kind of decisions. He said that with the baby coming in February, they needed more space, and that they thought it would be best if I found somewhere else to live. Not immediately, he said, not cruelly. He was careful about the word cruelly. He used it twice, as if to establish that what he was doing wasn't that. He said they would give me 3 months. They thought perhaps I could find a condo. He mentioned that condos in the south end of Barrie were quite affordable, actually. He was telling me to leave my own house. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about my wife, and how much she had loved him, and how confused she would be to see this. I thought about the Saturday we painted the master bedroom, and how she had laughed at my technique. I thought about the gardening tools on the curb. I said, "Do you know whose name is on the title of this house?" He blinked. He said he knew it was mine, but that things were different now. I told him I wanted to show him something. I had kept the file folder my lawyer had given me in the locked drawer of my desk. I took it out. I set it on the coffee table between us. I told him, "This house is registered solely in my name. I have no legal obligation to vacate my own property. I have been documenting what has happened here since March, and I have been meeting with a lawyer for the past 11 months. He stared at the folder. He didn't touch it. I told him that I was not angry. I told him that I loved him, and that I was genuinely glad about the baby, and that I had no desire to make his life harder, but I was also not leaving my home. If they wanted more space, they were welcome to find it elsewhere. I would assist them with first and last month's rent as a gesture of goodwill. That was my offer." He left without saying much. I heard them talking upstairs for a long time. I sat with my coffee and I was, strangely, very calm. His wife knocked on the basement door 2 hours later. She came down the stairs slowly, the way she always did since the pregnancy, and she sat in the chair across from me, and she looked at me and she said, "You planned this." I said, "I protected myself. There's a difference." She said she thought we had an understanding. I asked her what understanding she believed we had. She didn't answer that. I told her as gently as I could that I had given her the benefit of the doubt for a long time, that I had moved to the basement without making a legal argument, that I had watched her redecorate my home and reroute my mail and discard my late wife's belongings, and I had not said a word. I told her that my silence had never been consent. I told her that quietly, without raising my voice. She left. The following week, my son called me from work. He was different on the phone. Quieter, more like himself. He asked if we could talk, just the two of us, without her present. I said yes. He came over on a Wednesday evening, and we sat at the kitchen table. My kitchen table, the one I had bought at an estate sale in 2004, and he talked for a long time. He said he felt like he had been pulled in two directions and had made choices he wasn't proud of. He said he hadn't understood the full picture. He said a lot of things that were hard for him to say. I listened. I didn't interrupt. At one point he said, "I let things go too far. I know that. I'm sorry, Dad." That was the part that was hardest for me. Not the anger, not the legal maneuvering. That was all manageable. It was my son saying sorry across the kitchen table in the house where he grew up. That was the part that cost something. They moved out in January. He found a rental townhouse in Innisfil, about 20 minutes south. 2 bedrooms with room for the nursery. I helped him load the moving truck on a Saturday morning in -12 weather, which is just what you do in Ontario in January. His wife and I were civil. Not warm, but civil. My granddaughter was born in February. My son called me from the hospital, and I could hear in his voice that he had just seen something that rearranges a person permanently. I drove to the hospital the next morning. She was very small and very awake, and she looked exactly like her father did when he was born, which meant she also looked like my wife. I held her for a long time. My son watched me from across the room, and I think he understood something in that moment that no amount of legal documentation could have taught him. I don't know what his wife understood. That will take longer, if it happens at all. But my son was there in the room, watching his father hold his daughter, and his expression was the kind you can't manufacture. I still live at 14 Sycamore Ridge Drive. My wife's recipe cards are still in the kitchen drawer. I replanted her garden in the spring. A neighbor helped me identify which perennials had survived the winter. They see the baby every Sunday, and I drive down to Innisfil and we have dinner, and my son and I are finding our way back to something that resembles what we used to be. It takes time. That's the thing they don't tell you about being right. It doesn't feel the way you expect it to. You win the argument, and then you still have to live inside the family. You still have to be the father on Sunday evenings, passing the bread and asking about work and watching your son try to be good. But I'm still in my house. My wife's garden came back this spring, and the master bedroom is still antique white because I repainted it before anyone else could decide what color it should be. I've thought a lot about the month I spent in that basement. Not with bitterness, I'm past that, but with the kind of attention you give something after it's already over, when you can finally see its shape clearly. What I kept coming back to was the notebook. Not what was in it, but the act of writing it. Every evening I'd sit at that small desk under the single window, and I'd write down what had happened that day, calmly, without commentary. March 14th, April 3, April 19, just dates and facts. And there was something in that discipline, that quiet, unglamorous discipline, that held me together when everything else felt like it was sliding. It wasn't strategy at first. It was just the only honest thing I knew how to do. Bear witness. Keep the record straight. I think that's the thing about integrity that nobody mentions. It doesn't feel heroic when you're doing it. It feels like writing in a notebook in a basement while someone upstairs repaints your bedroom. It feels like driving to Toronto on a Tuesday to sit across from a lawyer and answer hard questions carefully. It feels like choosing again and again to stay grounded in what is actually true rather than what is convenient or comfortable. My wife used to say that good character is mostly just a long series of small choices that nobody notices. She was right. She usually was. And the thinking. Lord, the thinking mattered. I could have reacted in March when they first asked me to move downstairs. I could have made it a confrontation, set the legal record straight immediately, established my position loudly and early. Part of me wanted to, but I also understood on some level I couldn't fully articulate at the time that a confrontation would have forced my son to choose sides before he was ready to see clearly. So I waited. I documented. I met with my lawyer quietly. I let the situation develop until the truth of it became impossible to ignore. That patience wasn't passivity. It was the most deliberate thing I did throughout the whole ordeal. My son didn't change because I threatened him. He changed because I gave him enough rope to see what he was doing, and then I showed him calmly what I had known all along. The conversation at that kitchen table worked because by the time we sat down, there was nothing left to argue about. The facts were simply the facts. I hadn't manufactured a crisis. I had waited for the existing one to become visible. I'm not telling this story because I won. I'm telling it because of what I had to hold on to get through it. You need a kind of moral steadiness in situations like this, a refusal to become someone you'd be ashamed of, even when the provocation is real. You need the patience to think clearly when your instinct is to react, and you need the endurance to keep going, quietly and without applause, for as long as it takes. My granddaughter is 4 months old now. She doesn't know any of this happened. She just knows that when I hold her, I don't let go quickly. I intend to keep it that way.